I'm Jared Wareham, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the Cattle Call. I'm joined today by fellow cattle and grazing nerd Byron McCoy. We're going to talk about something today that's something that we kind of have an interest in and kind of had to because of the way we've started in agriculture, but is management intensive grazing. And one specific element of management intensive grazing is setting up your watering sites for and kind of how you go through the process of picking those sites, and then even more specific, kind of something he's doing today. We're going to get you some video of the process. We're kind of inside a building today to cut down on the wind. We're actually getting a nice thaw outside. It's been negative temperatures for the last several days, and it's a balmy, close to 50. But the wind is blowing, so we're gonna start out in here, talk a little bit about the process of setting up the waters, laying down the geofabric. It's kind of a lot of what we're going to get on film today is the process of laying down that geofabric, that textile fabric that you're going to put your rock on so you don't lose it around the waters. And then also he's used tire waters in this instance. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about the process of putting those waters in. I also have several tire waters. I put mine in a long time ago and made a lot of mistakes doing it. I've since corrected some of them, but sometimes you make things permanent, and so you can't go back and fix some of them. So it's nice to have some guys kind of point out some of those tips. Okay, this is what I did, and this is why I wouldn't do it again, or this is what I did now, and here's why, and some of that stuff. So we're going to kind of talk about that. And I think the reason grazing management is so important to us is, kind of got started the hard way as far as not having a lot of the resources available to be a cattleman and be involved in the cattle industry. So I had to keep my overhead low, and I know you do the same thing. You got to keep your overhead low, your expenditures down, and your efficiencies high. Well, there's no better way to do that from a young person's standpoint than to go ahead and make that investment into a grazing system. And really with the government EQIP programs and all the resources that are available now that weren't even available even 5-10 years ago, especially close to 20 years ago when I was putting mine in, which I don't consider myself an older guy, but 20 years ago I'm starting to kind of age myself a little bit. But it's changed so much, and there's more guys doing it now than ever before, and it just works. And so if you're a young guy trying to get started in the cattle business, this is something you really need to kind of take a really strong, hard look at. Is managed grazing, using the resources you have available to you. And today, the specific part of the managed grazing process we're going to talk about is the installation of your watering sites. So I know some of that's changed since I put mine in several years ago, and so I'm going to kind of turn this over to Byron a little bit and let him tell you kind of how, as far as the dimensions of where he's put the tires, how big the tires are, what specifications that he's digging down to lay the geofabric and some of that stuff. So,
okay,
turn it over to you.
What we're doing, where we're going to be going today is actually a row crop piece of ground that wasn't meeting the profitability standard we were seeking, so we were looking for other ways to make it more productive. And the first thing that jumped out and also aligns with a lot of where I like weighting my efforts is in rotational management grazing. So what we've done, we've converted an old piece of row crop ground that wasn't meeting our standards, and we went in last fall. We interseeded perennial ryegrass with a wheat crop, got the wheat crop off, and then gave that ryegrass a year to get established. We've been spending this winter prepping that ground to get cattle on, towards the end of this winter or early spring. And a few things we went in, we used overhead imagery, kind of seeing the overlay of both. We've worked it, we've been on it a lot, but also just identifying the best places to locate drinker sites and also subdivide this ground into paddocks so that we can have both permanent paddocks to work from as a basis, and then also give us flexibility in the future to subdivide that into smaller paddocks given manpower resources, the time we have, growth conditions of the grass, all the different things that, again, I think having a balance between both permanent and adjustable paddocks gives you an advantage too, because again, you can flex with the conditions on the ground, not just have it. So what we've done...
Yep, I would agree 100%. Flexibility is extremely important in grazing systems. The idea that you have to be rigid with the size of your paddocks or the type of fence or how extensive you're going to do subdivision stuff, flexibility is key, because no year is the same.
Nope.
Some years are dry, some years are wet, some are in between. Sometimes you have good fall growth, sometimes you don't. Sometimes your moisture comes more at one point in time in the year than another. So being able to be flexible and utilize that grass different is very key. And of course, I'm going to jump back a second. You said wasn't meeting your standards, and that's why you've turned it into a grazing system more so than the row crop. And I think that's something to reiterate here is that profit per acre is what he was referring to as far as meeting their standards. They can generate more profit per acre by turning this into a grazing scenario for cattle over the row crop, and a lot of that's probably because of reduced man hours going into it, reduced inputs, and some of that
A lot
increased
of
efficiency.
reduced upfront inputs.
Yep.
Again, I think one thing with a cattle crop and a calf crop, you can do a lot with management and your flexibility and your game plan more than you can with row crop, where again, a lot of that's, it's going to need the same amount of fertilizer. It's going to need, same amount of rain. Your seed costs are going to cost the same. But when it comes to livestock, again, you can tailor both your seed stock you're producing as well as your management principles to optimize the best return per acre that you can on that ground. And a lot of that starts with both a management plan with respect to the type of animals you're trying to build, and also how to best utilize those forage resources you have available on the ground which you're using. And again, when we're going back to these drinkers, having an efficient centrally located drinker allows you to really use a lot of ground, where if you're limited on water, especially when you start getting into these hot summer months down here in Missouri, they may not venture as far as you'd like them to go. And so even though they're on 80 acres, they may be only using about 50 of it. By breaking down these pieces of ground into smaller paddocks with a centrally located watering system, you can really efficiently use the ground that you have. And by doing that too, you also more evenly spread out the minerals that are getting consumed and then put back on the ground by those livestock, so it'll cut down on your fertilizer costs, because again, you're not concentrating resources here or there. It's getting put back and respread evenly by the natural cycle of the livestock that you're raising.
And not putting the waters in, or not putting them in the ideal situation so that you can fully utilize all the grass effectively would be like, well, I'm going to farm this ground, but I'm only going to farm 60% of it.
Right.
Basically, you're going to harvest, and by strategically placement of the waters and the type of waters, you're strategically trying to utilize 100% of the forage that's going to be available to you as far as the coverage of the farm. And so you're not just going to say, okay, I know I'm not going to be able to use these areas because the water is too far away. Well, no, we're going to use it all. We're not just going to farm part of it, because that's what you're doing. You're farming, you're using cattle to grab that grass to grow beef, and so you want to utilize 100% of the grass instead of just the parts of it that are the easiest. So.
Organically harvesting forage.
That sounds really good.
Cool, yeah.
Almost
How about it?
sounds really technical. So, but we're speaking of church it up. I'm glad we're amateurs. I love doing this. Real quick, while we're talking about technical stuff, describe the size of your tires. Was there a specific reason you went with that size?
Okay.
The depth, the size of your valves. Did you go with like a 2-inch valve or a 3-inch valve or a 1-inch valve, and why? And then go down to as far as your site that you're going to. We're going to go out later and see as far as the site area you have chosen to lay your geofabric around.
Okay. First off, the ground that we're going to be grazing is about 160 acres. So again, our initial planting herd size right now, we're having a conservative number, expecting to put about 40 pairs on it. And again, we'll see what it can do, and we'll flex the numbers accordingly. But with our expected herd size in mind first, that's what kind of drove what we decided for a drinker. We have 5.5 foot diameter drinkers on 3 of the sites, and we have a 6.5 foot on the second size, which will have an electric cross fence going over the top of it, so that gives them a little more space to both drink and not be crowded around it. After we made those decisions, again, we went out, we used imagery, and then also walking the ground, taking GPS points and things like that, and optimizing where those sites are going to be centrally located to what naturally breaks down to where we think the paddocks would be most efficient. 2 of the paddocks will be permanent paddocks, will be approximately 40 acres. 2 of the other more high production ones will be about 30, and then we also have a hillside that is a little shallower soil, which we'll use, we won't be grazed as hard as some of the other areas, but we'll also probably using it for staging bulls and other things during non-breeding seasons, and that's another separate site. So we put 4 drinkers on this 160 acre piece of ground, which will give us what we feel as plenty of ground to let these cattle drink and efficiently move and graze everything that's around there. Once we found those sites, we got with a local, water pipe layer and everything.
Okay.
So we went in and we got that done. We dug out into the ground first, and then beneath those tires we put a 1-inch road rock base to get a solid foundation so the tires be permanently fixed. After that, then we went in. We used for lines. We used 2-inch lines coming from the well house. What that does, that'll reduce the friction going through those lines and give it a good efficient flow. And then when we go into the actual water drinker itself, we downsize that to a 1-inch pipe coming up through the ground. And with that concentrated flow, it really gives a really strong jet coming up there. So, especially in the winter times like this, when that water gets low and they drink it down, it kicks on, it moves and stirs that whole tire drinker, which really helps, in the sub-zero temperatures we've had lately, keeping it moving, keeping it open when it's getting a lot of use, which is a positive.
Yep.
And then once we got that down, so where we're at now in the whole scheme of getting these set up is we have the tire drinker set, and then what we did is we're using geotextile fabric, which what we want is we want at least a 6-foot skirt going around that entire drinker, which will allow that full body of the animal to be standing on that geotextile covered in gravel, so that we can prevent animals from digging out dirt around there, pulling gravel with it, and or stuff settling, and just kind of keep a more uniform surface area for those animals coming up drinking, and just kind of reduce some of the problems that can come when they start digging out dirt around there, and then you start getting mud, and you start getting water, and different little things come up from that.
And I can speak from experience because I've got geotextile fabric around our waters, and we probably weren't as, we definitely weren't as stringent as far as doing things properly, putting them in the first time, as far as getting down and getting to that base layer and then putting the rock and then build it back up. And we manage it, but it is, if you don't do that correctly, then you will, even if you have just a little bit of that what do I call it, that adjustable media below it, the freeze thaw in wintertime, it'll cause this bubbling and rippling effect from the geofabric, and it'll actually kind of pop up and bubble, and you'll just battle that a little bit. So you're either going to battle it and kind of deal with it when the conditions get that way, or have to replace it. And so I can speak from experience, not having, all those years ago when I did it, there wasn't really a set, this is how you do it, and so we kind of just, roughed our way through it. But doing it like he's doing is the proper way to do it, and making sure you get that, and then, that way you don't have those issues that'll pop up later on. But how big are the tires that you got?
The tires themselves are 5.5-foot diameters
Okay.
around, and around that we've got a 12.5-foot wide roll of geotextile fabric, which will cut to length to give us that 6-foot 6-foot circumference around those tires, so that they can the animals be able to drink on it and cover it. And then after that, we're covering it in a minimum of 3 inches of rock. And another good resource, if you're interested in this stuff, is going into your local NRCS offices.
Yep.
They've got your both diagrams, all sorts of just easy resources where, again, if you can look at a picture and read and look at numbers, it's a good start. Again, you can always modify and change as you go.
Probably some digital sources available.
There
nowadays,
probably
too.
are, yep.
Yeah, and of course I haven't looked at some of that stuff in a while, but
Yeah.
you would have to assume that probably YouTube.
It's all there.
There's
yeah.
probably YouTube videos about how to do this. I mean, who would have thought it? But now there's going to be another one. So, but anyways, do you have anything else off the top of your head you can think of as far as any kind of float valve thing? I mean, probably just a standard. You got a 2-inch, 1-inch. Where are you?
We have a 1-inch valve going in
Okay.
there, and again, we used stainless steel parts just in anticipation of an animal getting in there wanting to mess around with it.
Yep.
Our overflow valves, they're also a little bit different. Rather than having a single solid pipe coming through there, and this was just something where we were talking to at a trade show, and they said, they kind of recommended this. We have a flexible sleeve in there where we've got steel coming up through the cement, and then we've got a flexible PVC pipe on top. That way, in the event something does get in there, and rather than breaking and messing a whole lot of stuff up, they just knock one little piece loose, and they get in that. And again, we haven't had any issues with that yet, and we're learning.
Yeah,
We're learning.
I can also speak from experience. If they can mess with it, they're going to mess with it. And so I've had some trouble with some of my floats because I did not get them confined enough away from the cows. I thought I had them far enough distance away where they could not reach in and mess with them. And for some odd reason, they see a float and they want to nose it. And so I've had to redo some of my designs and rework on some of the waters a little bit because of that. And still battling some of it today. I do have a solution to just got to get to it and get it done. But yeah, when you work with animals, if you don't think they can get to it, think again, because it's just the law of nature. They're gonna if it can happen, it's probably going to at some point. So I tell you what we're gonna do, so we don't make this too super long and bore you guys to death. I think we've covered a lot of the good stuff, a lot of the important stuff in here. Now we can go out to the site, and a lot of what we do the rest of the video, we'll probably have a prelude and then also some post video here to look at as far as the finished waters and then the finishing of the installation process as he lays the geofabric down, covers it with rock, and you can kind of see a start to finish process on that. And if you have any questions after you watch this video, I'll have a little bit of information at the end. You can contact either one of us and probably pick our brains on that. Some of the do's and don'ts, more of the do's and then the don'ts. So, but I don't know if people saw that, the do's and the don'ts, so because I've got plenty of those. So anyways, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this episode of the Cattle Call, and we'll keep moving on down the road.
Right on.
Okay, here behind us, here's our roll of geotextile fabric. As you can see, it's just a industrial fabric, lets the water and everything filter down through and keeps the rock up high. Behind us over here too, we have a 6.5 foot diameter tire drinker. What we're gonna do, we're gonna unroll the roll of fabric. We're gonna cut about 20 feet, which will give us plenty of play to position that piece of fabric around the tire. Then we've got stakes where we're gonna use to stake it down into the ground so that it effectively gets pinned down. Then we'll cut a second piece of fabric to get an overlap and get the other side of the tire drinker. And we'll tamp that down. We'll get about an 18-inch overlap between the two so that no rock settles down between them. Once we've got that fixed on the ground, then we'll get our rock, cover it, level it off, and call it a day.